Yo! Video games.
What up, dudes? It's Matt here from YoVideogames. Well, as we continue down our road to E3 with our Zelda memories, we finally come to the big one. The greatest game of all time, the most popular, the most played, almost the most sold, but not quite. It's actually been eclipsed now. I'm talking about Ocarina of Time, naturally. Now, for a lot of people, this is one of the best video games they've ever played. That's probably more the casual Zelda fans. For the really hardcore Zelda fans, there's a lot of, I don't know how you would say, maybe hipstery movement against the title. But for those of you who are on the outside looking in and wondering just why such a low poly, very janky frame rate ridden action adventure light RPG like this gets so much praise, you have to understand that Ocarina of Time is a product of its time. And what do I mean by that is, well, you got to understand that when Ocarina of Time was coming out, not quite out, but coming out, there were a lot of really harsh transitions to 3D. Now, say Mario 64 came out and it was wonderful and beautiful, but it succeeded mostly because it didn't try to emulate the 2D style of Mario games in 3D. It actually created its own sort of genre. Now, there were a lot of other attempts to make classic franchises in 3D, and they were not very good. You can look at like the Contra games, and you can look at some of the other early attempts to bring other games. Like Castlevania 64 wasn't quite out yet, but it was coming out, and it didn't look good, and it really wasn't that good. It wasn't that bad either, but it wasn't that good. So there were a lot of titles that, just weren't making that 3D transition very well. So what was being successful, what was working, were original IPs, which is cool, which is what you want to see, honestly. But yeah, it was a time where 3D was eclipsing 2D, even though 2D games were fucking gorgeous at the time, but you had these really clunky early 3D fighters that people wanted to play instead. It's like, yeah, Virtua Fighter was pretty good, but it's funny how there are so many Virtua Fighter clones that came out right after that game, and everyone was scrambling to get a hold of those titles when, Marvel and versus Capcom and other games like that were coming out, and they were just gorgeous and looked so much better, played so much better. But yeah, there was definitely still some hesitation from a lot of people that Zelda could make the transition to 3D, especially when a lot of other games hadn't really done that transition very well. And even if they had done it well, they had to change so much. So there was a lot of fear that Zelda would kind of lose its essence, or just really what I remember a lot is that it just wasn't going to work. Well, I was still pumped. I was still excited because I was a big Nintendo fanboy at the time, and I really was like jazzed for everything that was coming with the game. But the game was also very cool because it was doing a lot of firsts. It had a very big game world, which was something we all craved. We wanted to see the limits of N64 really pushed. It was doing the no fog thing. That's a funny thing that a lot of you probably don't remember, is that during the PlayStation N64 era, there was a lot of in-game fog. The fog was basically the draw distance that a game could hold while, with the limited RAM it had access to. And you would see a lot of, basically, worlds fading in. You would either get pop-up or fog. Like Mario 64 actually doesn't have fog. It actually has a lot of pop-up. So either way, they're not fun to look at. They're not good to look at. The more smarter games would do things where the corridors would be narrow, or you would have to turn a lot of corners to hide this shit, or you'd have a lot of loading screens. That was always a blast on the PlayStation, loading screens between small areas. But anyway, so Zelda was obviously not going to have any loading times because we all followed Miyamoto down that fucking dark rabbit hole of cartridges for the N64, and here we got no loading, and we had no fog. The only problem was that Rare had beaten Nintendo to the punch with the fantastic Banjo-Kazooie, which is a game that has sharper, higher-res textures, better coloring, and definitely no fog. Still, though, it's Zelda, and you really wanted Zelda to be great, and boy, howdy was it ever. I mean, let's talk about other things. It had a time-of-day cycle, which was probably not unheard of, but it was not something that was common. It was something that you would really jazz to see in motion and actually see happen. That was really cool. It did the whole light world, dark world mechanic, but this time it did it with time, where the flow and age of time, how things change over, but it's the same world. It was actually a very clever concept, and again, this was only the second Zelda game to do this, so it wasn't the played-out concept that it has become in all subsequent Zelda games, because I don't know. I mean, I guess Zelda: A Link to the Past, it was really cool to have the dark world and the light world, but holy shit, did they get really hung up on that duality, and that started to infect other Zelda games too. But, talking, Ocarina of Time, 1998, this was like only the second time it was being done, and it was done at least in a different enough way that it was still cool to see, and what didn't feel like just another excuse to use the same type of mechanic. Other things that were really cool about it is that it had Z-targeting. Now, some people will sit there and cry, well, Mega Man Legends did it earlier. And it's like, yeah, it did, but Mega Man Legends controls like butt. Sorry, but I mean, playing that game in retrospect is like, woof, that is rough as shit. Zelda had the more analog, freeform 3D movement, controlled really well. The only thing Zelda really had a problem with was that it didn't have any sort of camera control whatsoever. You could just center the camera by pressing Z. That was it. And that's how it was on Twilight Princess for the Wii, which is unlike the GameCube and Wii U versions where you have full camera control, and oh my god, it feels so much better. But really, other than that, like, the game came out and it just defied everyone's expectations. Because again, you may not remember this, but we were kind of expecting Ocarina of Time to kind of maybe be a disappointing 3D iteration of a beloved 2D franchise. There was definitely that fear there. Now, there was a lot of hype behind the game, of course, but man, when it came out and it ran as well as it did, and yes, I know the frame rate is under 30, but it is actually kind of a weirdly consistent, like 24 frames a second. It came out to fight expectations, and it really just blew everyone away, and it really sort of laid the foundation that would be copied by so many games afterwards. It's one of those big influential games that just... The N64 was a system, let's be honest, didn't have a lot of games, and definitely had its fair share of shovelware and ports, but here's the thing. As Adam Sessler once said, you can't deny the influence of N64's best games. Mario 64, GoldenEye, and Ocarina of Time. Those three games changed the fucking industry. And you really can't, you can't really look that. I mean, even if you don't like Ocarina of Time as much as the other games, that's fine, that's fair. But you gotta, give it respect that it deserves, and that is, yeah, it changed the industry. It also set in motion, for better and sometimes for worse, how Zelda games would proceed in the future. Combat actually had to take a huge backseat. You couldn't just run around and mindlessly swipe things until they went poof. Now you had to lock on to enemies, you had to, circle around them. There was a lot more focused, combat where it's horizontal, vertical, and stabs. And the one kind of problem with that is during the N64 you could understand. It's pushing the system to its limits, especially without the expansion pack in Ocarina, and you kind of really gotta narrow down the fights. You're not gonna fight more than one or two things at a time, and then because it's 3D space, and you don't have the same sort of precise awareness of how far your sword reaches, you kind of have to basically make things a little easier, So I understand why some of the fights with 3D enemies are actually not really that tough. They're actually kind of dirt easy. And of course, we were talking N64, so AI was also very minor or very just low at the time, so it's all understandable. But, it still works. It still has its challenge, at least for first-time players. Definitely not for anyone who's been playing games for a long time. So, that being said, I love how Ocarina of Time came out. Again, Koizumi had a hand in a lot of the 3D rendering and a lot of the hidden backstory in the game. And one of the weird things about Ocarina of Time is that Miyamoto is notoriously hesitant and angry at using story and text in video games. You might think I would love him for this, but I think he goes a little too far sometimes. And basically, Koizumi would have to hide story bits of characters and dialogue and just world building behind NPCs so that Miyamoto wouldn't notice it, and basically hide all cool story bits within there, which is kind of funny, but in a weird way, it actually worked because it kind of made the world feel more dense and alive. If you ever go into the Kakariko graveyard for the first time as a kid and you talk to the Composer brothers, it's pretty cool to have something like that within the game, and it was hidden in there because they had to. They were forced to, because you had this sort of George Lucas mentality of Miyamoto where it's I'm making an RPG adventure game and I don't want to have any text. So it's pretty cool how they were still able to sneak things in. Art through adversity right there, people. So all that being said, how do I like Ocarina of Time? It's just one of my favorite games of all time. I have a lot of fond memories of playing it. I was obsessed with the game coming out. It was time grinded to a fucking halt. I was able to get the gold cartridge in. I actually now own 2 gold cartridge packages for Ocarina of Time. and I wouldn't sell them for the world. But I love the game to death. I love the way it humanized Ganondorf, although he didn't really get a sympathetic backstory to Wind Waker, but the seeds were planted there, and you could really see a way more fleshed out Hyrule. Because really, honestly, up until this point, Hyrule was just kind of sort of this wonderful, beautiful, magical land, and then some asshole just came along and wanted to ruin it all. Well, now we had a much more political look at the world. We got an idea of who these thieves were, where they came from. We had an idea of like who was actually fighting, because fighting alongside the royal family, and we learned about the Sheikah tribe, who were kind of the secret protectors of the Hylians and stuff like that. We learned about where Link got his tunic from, and why Link is the only one who wears that green tunic. And then they, of course, had to go and fuck all that up with all the shitty fucking flagship shitbag Zelda stories that came before this game, but we'll just focus on the good shit right now. So yes, Ocarina of Time kind of showed us that and gave a pretty good reason for it. Changed the Zoras up a lot, made them good guys, but it was still kind of neat to see. We got the introduction of the Gorons, so yeah, it was a trendsetter, but it's to this day, it's still really good. It has a ton of dungeons. The dungeons are varied. You go in a tree, you go in a cave, then you go in a whale's fucking belly. Then you do things like temples underwater and stuff like that, and then like pyramid-like stuff. It's good stuff. Lots of good variety, and it still holds up today. I mean, now though, if you really want to play it, you got to play it on the 3DS. The improved textures, the improved character models, and the improved frame rate. You can't deny that. If you're going to play the game now, play it on the 3DS. I really wish they would offer a way to play Ocarina of Time 3D in HD on the Wii U. I'd really love that to be a download title. That would be the ultimate way to play it, but till that day comes, I think we're just going to be stuck playing it on our old N64 emulators. When I mean emulators, I mean virtual console like Wii and Wii U. I'm not endorsing piracy, you jack-offs. Or on the 3DS. So that's all I got to say for Ocarina of Time 3D. Is it as good as it say it is? Does it live up to the hype? Yes. Yes, it does. And it is better than Final Fantasy VII. You know it. I know it. Just accept it. Let it in. It'll all be over soon. Alright, let me know what you guys think, and let me share your memories of Ocarina of Time with me in the comments below, and I'll catch you on the channel. Later, dudes!